Racist white woman hits a black man in public. But when he hits back, the entire world stops watching in shock. The scene was loud, explosive, and caught on camera for everyone to see. What started as a normal day in a grocery store turned into a story that would divide opinions, spark outrage, and reveal ugly truths. Before we dive into this unbelievable story, make sure you smash that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, because what you're about to hear will leave you speechless. The day began like any other, sunlight pouring through the glass doors of the grocery mall as families, workers, and students shuffled in with their lists and trolleys. The automatic doors slid open with a hiss, and inside, the smell of fresh bread and polished tiles lingered in the air. Among the crowd was Jamal, a hardworking black man who carried himself with quiet dignity. He had just finished a long shift and stopped by to grab a few essentials: bread, milk, vegetables, and his mother's favorite tea. He waited patiently in line, one hand resting on his cart, the other already pulling out his wallet. For Jamal, this was supposed to be routine, but destiny had other plans. When it was his turn at the cashier, he greeted the young woman behind the counter with a tired smile, carefully placing his goods on the conveyor belt. She began scanning them one by one, the beeps echoing rhythmically. Jamal reached into his wallet, pulled out crisp notes, and extended his hand to pay. That was when the storm hit. A sharp voice sliced through the quiet hum of the store. "People like you should know your place." Heads turned instantly. Shoppers froze, their mouths slightly open. A middle-aged white woman, dressed in a bold red blouse and clutching her purse tightly, stormed forward from the line behind him. Her eyes burned with venom as though Jamal's very existence had insulted her. Without warning, without hesitation, her hand swung violently across his face. The crack of the slap echoed through the aisles. Gasps filled the air. Children clutched their mother's skirts. A man dropped a cereal box. The cashier froze, her hands trembling above the scanner. Jamal staggered slightly, his cheeks stinging, his dignity wounded. But it wasn't just the physical pain, it was the humiliation, the audacity, the sheer hatred poured into that single blow. His chest rose and fell heavily as he steadied himself. And then it happened. Jamal's palm shot forward with the force of storm, landing squarely across the woman's face. The sound was louder, heavier, a roar compared to her whisper. Her head snapped to the side, and her body froze in stunned silence. The once fiery arrogance in her eyes melted into wide-eyed disbelief. The entire store erupted. Some shouted in outrage, others clapped instinctively, and a few scrambled to record the chaos on their phones. The sound of clicks and video recordings filled the air like sparks in a burning field. But Jamal didn't flinch. He didn't back down. He stood tall, his shoulders squared, his jaw clenched. His voice, deep and thunderous, shook the space. "I will never kneel to hatred. You touch me again, you'll learn respect the hard way." The woman's face turned pale, her hands clutching her cheek as if the shock of equality had just burned her skin. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. For the first time, she wasn't the one in control. For the first time, she realized the weight of the disrespect she had thrown so carelessly. The cashier whispered under her breath, eyes darting nervously from Jamal to the woman. "Sir, please, maybe let it go." But Jamal's silence spoke louder than any plea. His eyes never left his aggressor. Behind the crowd, murmurs spread like wildfire. Some whispered about racism, others about justice. Some argued that a man should never hit a woman, while others countered, saying no one should ever hit anyone, period. The debate raged in real time, right there in the store, as though the walls themselves had become the court of justice. The woman's arrogance cracked further when she saw people recording. She glanced around frantically, realizing her reputation, her pride, her so-called superiority were dissolving in front of dozens of witnesses. One man even shouted, "Upload it now. The world needs to see this." Another woman added, "She started it. She had no reason to touch him." The humiliation was no longer Jamal's. It was hers. Jamal bent slowly, gathered his groceries with steady hands, and placed them back in his cart. His composure was unshaken, though the sting on his cheek still burned. Every eye followed him. Every phone captured him. Every whisper revolved around him. Yet he walked calmly, each step a declaration of dignity reclaimed. The woman, shaking, tried to regain her footing. He assaulted me, she stammered, her voice cracking, pointing at Jamal like a cornered animal. But no one moved. No one rushed to her aid. Instead, a voice rose from the crowd, strong, fierce, undeniable. No, you hit him first, and you thought you could get away with it. Not today. The crowd erupted in murmurs of agreement. The cashier slowly handed Jamal his receipt, her eyes soft with unspoken respect. Jamal nodded, took his bag, and turned away. Behind him, the woman stood frozen, her face burning red. Not from the slap alone, but from the shame of knowing the world no longer stood on her side. The door slid open as Jamal walked out into the sunlight, but the storm was just beginning. Because outside those walls, the videos were already being uploaded, already being shared, already being dissected. Within hours, hashtags would trend, headlines would scream, and debates would ignite across every corner of the internet. For Jamal, it had been just another slap. But for the world, it was a reckoning. And deep inside, he knew this was only the beginning of a battle far bigger than himself. Outside the grocery store, Jamal clutched his bag of groceries, his face calm, but his veins burning with silent fury. He walked to his car, each step echoing like a drumbeat in his ears. He thought the confrontation would end at that moment, but it was only the spark that lit a wildfire he could never have imagined. Inside the store, dozens of phones had captured the slap. By the time Jamal turned his key in the ignition, the first video had already been posted online. A teenager who witnessed it uploaded it with the caption, "Racist woman slaps black man for shopping. He slaps back harder. Justice served." Within minutes, the video spread like lightning. Notifications buzzed, hashtags trended, and strangers began arguing from thousands of miles away. By the time Jamal reached home, his name was already being whispered on every platform. In living rooms, in offices, in classrooms, the debate raged. Some voices roared with outrage. No man should ever hit a woman, no matter what. Others countered with equal fire. Equality means accountability. If she can dish it, she better take it. Clips replayed the scene in slow motion. Memes sprouted overnight. The woman's fiery red blouse and her shocked face became a symbol plastered across headlines. Racist slap gone wrong. By the next morning, the media descended on the grocery store. News vans parked outside. Anchors stood in front of cameras, microphones raised, narrating the viral clash as if it were breaking national news. The store manager, flustered and sweating, tried to downplay the chaos, but the truth was undeniable. The video had given the world a new battlefield. Meanwhile, the woman at the center of the storm, Margaret Doyle, sat trembling in her suburban home. Her once proud face was now plastered across TV screens. Old neighbors whispered about her temper. Coworkers exposed her racist remarks from years past, and distant relatives shook their heads in embarrassment. She scrolled through endless comments online. She got what she deserved. That slap was for history itself. Lock her up. Margaret's arrogance dissolved into panic. She thought she had the upper hand when she struck Jamal. But the world she once thought would protect her was now turning against her with merciless speed. On the other side of town, Jamal sat in his modest living room, his phone buzzing nonstop. Calls from reporters, messages from strangers, even invitations from activists flooded in. His sister, Aisha, stormed into the room waving her phone. "Do you even realize? You're a hero now. People are calling you the man who stood up to hate." Jamal shook his head, the weight of it pressing on him. "I didn't slap her to be a hero. I slapped her because I'm done letting anyone treat me like I'm less human. But this is bigger than me." And he was right. Across the city, protests began to form. Crowds carried signs. Respect is not optional. No more silent suffering. The video had ignited a movement. Margaret, desperate to regain control, went on live television. Sitting stiffly in her chair, her lawyer by her side, she tried to spin the story. I was provoked. He intimidated me. I felt threatened, but the world wasn't buying it. Reporters bombarded her with questions. Why did you hit him first? Is it true you've made racist remarks before? Why should anyone believe you? Her voice cracked as cameras flashed. For the first time, Margaret wasn't just a woman in red. She was a symbol of arrogance brought to its knees. Meanwhile, Jamal's story grew louder. Activists demanded justice, not just for him, but for countless others who had suffered in silence. His calm composure in the aftermath became the image people shared with pride. Children in schools repeated his words, "I will never kneel to hatred." But not everyone stood with him. A darker side of the internet began to attack. Trolls spat venom online, calling him names, threatening him, twisting the narrative to paint him as the villain. Some said he overreacted. Others claimed he had disrespected tradition. The noise was deafening. Jamal's job called him, advising him to lay low. His neighbors began whispering when he walked past. Cameras sometimes showed up outside his door. He was no longer invisible. He was a storm walking on two legs. And yet, amidst the chaos, something shifted. Jamal began receiving letters. Handwritten notes slipped under his door, messages from strangers who had endured humiliation, prejudice, or violence. One note read, "I've been silent for years, but because of you, I feel seen." He realized his slap wasn't just retaliation. It was liberation, for him and for many. But Margaret wasn't done. Fueled by shame and desperation, she pressed charges, accusing Jamal of assault. The irony didn't escape anyone. The woman who struck first now wanted justice against the man who struck back. The news exploded again. Headlines screamed, "Margaret Doyle sues Jamal for assault." The world split in half. Protesters surrounded the courthouse, chanting Jamal's name. Margaret arrived flanked by lawyers, her once proud head now lowered under the weight of booze. Jamal walked in, calm and collected, but the fire in his eyes had only grown. Inside, the judge's gavel struck, silencing the chaos. The trial began. Witnesses stepped forward, each recounting what they saw that day in the grocery store. The cashier testified in a trembling voice, confirming Margaret's slap had landed first. Shoppers described the venom in her words, the violence in her actions. Margaret's lawyers tried to twist the narrative, painting Jamal as aggressive and threatening. But each word collapsed under the weight of the truth, the video. Played in court, the footage spoke louder than any testimony. The slap Margaret delivered, the slap Jamal returned. The equality undeniable. The courtroom buzzed as the video replayed. Jurors shifted uncomfortably. Margaret's face paled with every second. Jamal sat still, his gaze steady. When the judge finally spoke, the room froze. No one is above accountability. You struck him first. He defended himself. This court will not be used to shield arrogance from justice. The gavel fell. Margaret lost. Outside the courthouse, the crowd erupted into cheers. Jamal raised his hand slightly, not as a victor, but as a man who had stood firm. Cameras captured the moment, broadcasting it to millions. For Margaret, the slap she delivered had become her undoing. For Jamal, the slap he returned had become a symbol. And for the world, the clash between the two was no longer just about two people in a grocery store. It was about centuries of silence finally being shattered. The courthouse doors had barely swung shut before the world erupted again. News anchors barked updates, talk shows replayed the clip on endless loops, and headlines screamed across screens. Judge rules in Jamal's favor, self-defense confirmed. But while Jamal walked out with his dignity intact, Margaret's humiliation deepened. Her name trended worldwide, not as a victim, but as the face of arrogance exposed. Memes mocked her, hashtags dragged her through the mud. Someone even edited her slap into a remix that went viral overnight, the beat dropping right when Jamal's hand struck back. The internet laughed, and the laughter cut deeper than any verdict. Margaret retreated into her home, blinds drawn tight, but the walls couldn't keep out the voices. Protesters gathered on her lawn, chanting "No more hate" and accountability for all. Neighbors who once smiled politely now crossed the street to avoid her. Her job issued a statement condemning her behavior, suspending her indefinitely. Her friends stopped answering calls. She had become a ghost in her own neighborhood, living but unwanted. Meanwhile, Jamal's life shifted into an entirely different orbit. Overnight, he became a reluctant figurehead. His name carried weight, his voice amplified. Activist groups invited him to speak at rallies. Universities asked him to lecture about dignity and equality. For the first time, Jamal realized the slap wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a movement. At first, he resisted. "I'm not a leader," he told Aisha one night, pacing their small living room. "I'm just a man who got tired of being disrespected." But Aisha, fiery and determined, placed a hand on his shoulder. "Leaders don't choose the spotlight, Jamal. Sometimes it chooses them. And you've been chosen." He thought of the letters he'd received, the voices of strangers who said his defiance gave him strength. Slowly, he accepted that his story was no longer just his own. Yet the storm was far from over. Margaret struck back the only way she knew how, with venom. She sat for an interview on a small cable network that still sympathized with her, painting herself as the tragic figure. "I've lost everything," she sobbed, her mascara streaking down her face. "My job, my friends, my peace. All because I stood up to a man who scared me. And now I'm the villain." The host leaned in, feeding her lines. "Some say you're being unfairly targeted. That cancel culture has gone too far. What do you want to say to them?" Margaret's lips quivered before her mask slipped just slightly. "I want the world to know people like him should have never been allowed to rise this high." The clip spread instantly, confirming what the world already knew. Her prejudice wasn't gone. It was her fuel. And with those words, whatever sympathy she might have had left vanished like smoke in the wind. For Jamal, the chaos brought both opportunities and dangers. With fame came shadows. Death threats began filling his inbox. Anonymous messages warned him to stay in his lane or pay the price. Cars idled suspiciously outside his home at night. He wasn't afraid. He had endured worse, but he knew this was no longer just about a slap. It was about power, about people clinging to their crumbling illusions of superiority. His lawyer urged caution. "Stay visible, Jamal. They can't silence you if the world is watching." So Jamal leaned into the spotlight. He agreed to interviews, but on his terms. He told his story plainly, with fire in his eyes and truth in his words. Respect isn't optional. Dignity isn't negotiable. And no one, no matter their skin, their gender, or their status, has the right to put their hands on another human being. Clips of his speeches spread like wildfire. His voice, once drowned by years of quiet endurance, now thundered across platforms, across borders, across generations. Young people rallied behind him, calling him a modern-day warrior for respect. But Margaret's camp wasn't finished. Hidden allies poured money into smearing Jamal's name. Fake news articles circulated, claiming he had a violent history. Edited clips tried to twist the narrative. Headlines blared. Is Jamal really a hero, or just another aggressor? The noise was deafening, but Jamal refused to bend. Each time a lie surfaced, more truth followed. Witnesses defended him. Old videos showed his years of community service, his calm character, his dignity. Every attempt to drag him down only lifted him higher. And then the unthinkable happened. One evening, as Jamal returned home from a speaking engagement, he found his front porch vandalized. Spray painted across the door were the words, "Know your place." The very phrase Margaret had spat in his face inside the grocery store. Jamal's chest heaved as he stared at the words. Aisha rushed out behind him, her face pale. "They won't stop, Jamal. They'll try to break you." But Jamal didn't break. He turned to her, his jaw set like steel. "Then we fight louder." He called a press conference the next morning, standing in front of the vandalized door with cameras rolling. His voice carried like a storm. "This is not just my fight. This is our fight. Every time someone tells us to know our place, they're afraid of what happens when we rise. Well, let me tell you, we are rising, and we will not be silenced." The footage spread globally. What began as a slap in a grocery store had now transformed into a battle cry heard across continents. Jamal's words inspired protests in cities he had never stepped foot in. His face appeared on posters, murals, and banners. But while the world lifted him, Margaret descended deeper into chaos. Her house was up for sale. Her employers cut ties permanently. Friends who once nodded along to her venom now avoided her entirely. She sat alone in the darkness of her living room, clutching old photos of a life that was gone. And still, her pride whispered lies into her ear. This isn't your fault. They made you the villain. You're the victim. But in the mirror, staring back at her, was the face of a woman who had struck first and thought she would never be challenged. The tide had turned. The slap had become legend, and the war for truth was still burning. The sun rose over the city with a fiery glow, but for Margaret Doyle, light had become her enemy. Every headline, every notification on her phone was another reminder that the world had turned against her. She sat in her dim living room, curtains drawn, clutching a cup of cold coffee with trembling hands. The woman who once strutted through stores with arrogance now cowered in silence, her empire of pride reduced to ash. But outside her crumbling fortress, the world was alive with Jamal's voice. He stood on a stage in front of thousands, microphone in hand, his presence commanding. Protesters filled the square, banners waving in the wind. The chants rose like thunder. Respect, justice, equality. Jamal raised a hand, silencing the crowd, his eyes burning with fire. I didn't ask for this fight, he began, his voice echoing through speakers and across live streams watched by millions. But when you're slapped for daring to exist, you have two choices: bow your head or stand tall. And I chose to stand tall. The crowd erupted. Tears streamed down faces. Strangers embraced. The energy was electric, unstoppable, a tide too strong for anyone to resist. Meanwhile, Margaret tried one last desperate move. She arranged another television interview, hoping to claw back sympathy. Dressed in muted colors, she dabbed fake tears with a tissue, her voice shaking as she said, "I've been persecuted. I've lost everything. Cancel culture has destroyed my life. I'm the real victim here." But the host wasn't buying it. Clips of her past tirades played on screen, videos of her berating delivery drivers, shouting slurs at neighbors, humiliating waiters. The receipts were endless, undeniable. The audience turned cold. For every word she spoke, the world saw a pattern of venom, not a moment of weakness. Her mask shattered live on television. She stormed off set, microphone still hot, muttering curses that only sealed her downfall. By the time she returned home, the internet had already clipped her outburst, spreading it with the caption, "The mask slips." The next morning, Margaret's name was etched into history, not as a martyr, but as a warning. Employers blacklisted her. Banks closed accounts linked to her businesses. Neighbors sold their houses just to escape her presence. Her once proud world shrank to a silent, suffocating prison. Jamal, on the other hand, was invited to the state capitol to meet with leaders. His words from the grocery store, "I will never kneel to hatred," had become a slogan painted on murals and chanted in marches. Universities called him a speaker. Organizations sought him as an ambassador. He never asked for fame, but he accepted the responsibility, carrying the weight of those who couldn't speak for themselves. Yet Jamal never forgot the cost. Late at night, when the crowds were gone, he sat alone with his thoughts, replaying that moment again and again. The sting of her slap, the silence of the crowd, the roar of his own hand striking back. He knew he hadn't just defended himself. He had shattered a chain that had held countless people before him. The grocery store itself became a symbol. Customers took photos at aisle 5, where the confrontation happened. The cashier, once trembling with fear, now proudly told her story of what she witnessed. He didn't start it, she said, but he ended it. Margaret, watching from the shadows of her home, realized too late that Jamal's strength wasn't just in his hand. It was in his truth. And truth is a weapon no lie can ever silence. The final blow to Margaret's pride came weeks later, when the court ordered her to pay damages for defamation and harassment. Cameras swarmed as she left the courthouse, her face gaunt, her once fiery eyes hollow. Reporters shouted questions. Do you regret it? Do you still believe he was wrong? But she kept her head down, no words left, her silence louder than her lies had ever been. Meanwhile, Jamal stood on the courthouse steps, sunlight gleaming against his skin. Reporters crowded him too, microphones in his face. He didn't gloat. He didn't sneer. He spoke with the same steady fire that had carried him through all. This was never about me versus her. This was about right versus wrong. Hate struck first, but respect struck back. And today, respect won. The crowd cheered. His lawyer smiled. Aisha wrapped her arms around him, whispering, "You did it, brother." But Jamal shook his head softly. We did it. All of us. Every voice that refused to stay silent. That night, as the city lights shimmered, Jamal returned home. On his porch, the hateful graffiti had been painted over, replaced by a mural of his face with bold words beneath. Stand tall. Children played nearby, pointing proudly. Elderly neighbors nodded in respect. His community had claimed him not just as a man, but as a symbol. Inside his home, Jamal finally sat down, the noise of the world fading for a moment. He touched the cheek where Margaret had struck him, the memory still sharp. But instead of bitterness, he felt strength. That slap, meant to humiliate, had become his crown of fire. And as he looked out the window at the city, rising with new courage, he whispered to himself, "They told me to know my place. Well, my place is here, unshaken, unbroken, unbowed." The story ended not with silence, but with a roar, the roar of a man who refused to be small, and a world that learned the cost of prejudice when it dares to strike. And so, what began with a single slap inside a grocery store became a storm that shook an entire community, exposing prejudice, destroying arrogance, and turning one man into a symbol of truth and courage. Jamal didn't just hit back. He stood tall, and the world watched as hate crumbled under the weight of justice. But don't think it ends here, because where there is pride, there is always another fall waiting. And the next story? It's darker, louder, and twice as shocking. Thank you for watching. Hit that subscribe button, turn on the bell, and comment where you're watching from. Because trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next.